Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. Alan Miller back with you, and we have a return guest. She hasn't been here in 2 years, but always a fascinating guest, TERESA Nelson, who is the chief attorney of the Minnesota ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. And TERESA, welcome back.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
You're also the interim director because
Yes.
Charles Samuelson recently retired, and I figured you were a lock for that, and you told me, no, I just want to stay and be the attorney. I didn't want that job.
That's right. That's right. Our long-term executive director, unfortunately, had to retire unexpectedly, and so I am keeping things going until we hire our new executive director.
And Chuck and I had Syracuse in common because we were
okay,
both
yeah.
Syracusans, and we always talked about that. So you're going to have to bone up on the Orange Men.
I'll work on that.
Okay. You were very nice to accommodate us today by having a large article in the local
That's
papers.
Right, yes.
Somali family sues over detention upon return from Canada. Tell us a little bit about the background of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So it happened in 2015. The Wilwal Abdigani family was traveling back to their home in the Twin Cities from
Both are citizens.
from
Let's
Canada.
mention that.
Yep, both citizens, 4 children who are all U.S. citizens, and they were what was an ordinary family visit in Canada turned to anything but ordinary when they tried to cross back into the United States. After Abdisalam handed the citizenship documents, the birth certificate, passports, to the people at Customs and Border Protection, they were greeted with armed men pointing guns at them, terrified the children.
Literally
pointing
putting
guns.
a gun in the face of the father of that
Yes.
family, to the hysteria of an 8-year-old in particular. But
Yeah. I mean, it was terrifying. And so the father was dragged, handcuffed, and taken away. The mother was ordered to drive the van and park it, and then the rest of the family was ordered into the station where they were held apart from Abdisalam.
and these are American citizens. They
Yes.
have been naturalized. They have lived here for a number of years. It's not as though they just arrived yesterday.
Right. These are American citizens. They had no reason to be suspected of anything. In fact, at the end of the almost 11 hours of detention, after Homeland Security had interviewed him, they noted in one document that we obtained that they found no derogatory information about him, and so he was free.
They had no reason to stop him in the first place.
No reason whatsoever.
And while we appreciate keeping the border safe, there is, and there has been, for people of color as well as the Somali community, there has been a lot of tension because of overreaction, and I'm sure that's what it is here. It's also profiling.
That's right. So there, we've heard a lot of stories about people who are unnecessarily hassled at the border. They're subjected to more intense scrutiny when they're coming into the country. This was on the far extreme. Holding them for almost 11 hours is really extreme, even for Customs and Border Protection. But this is part of a broader pattern, and a broader pattern with the way that our watch list system is set up. There are tens of thousands of names on our terrorist watch lists, very loose criteria to get on that list, and almost impossible to get off.
And that's the thing, almost impossible to get off. Or there may be two people with the same name, which certainly is a distinct possibility. And then what happens is they hold the wrong person.
Yep.
And so let's talk about the ACLU. Number one, ACLU does not take fees.
That is correct.
You bring a case in somebody's behalf, they don't pay a fee. If there's a financial recovery, you're not really involved in that.
Just to clarify, so anytime that we take a case, right, the clients don't pay anything. If there's a recovery, the clients get the damages recovery. There are some provisions there's some cases where we have the ability to get attorney's fees, where the court will award it under federal law, and those fees will go back to the ACLU of Minnesota Foundation to help fund future litigation. So we do sometimes get fees, but it is...
People have to understand that the ACLU also will, as we've said previously on this program, if it's protecting Nazis who want to parade in Skokie, Illinois, the ACLU will protect their rights as well as this Somali family.
Yep, that's right.
And here you partner with local law firms that volunteer to do this work. In this case, it's Robbins Kaplan, Mike Cerisi's old firm. He was just here with about 2 weeks ago talking about Cerisi Conlon, his new firm. But Robbins Kaplan has gone on to volunteer an attorney to work with these people. And it's all pro bono. It's all without fee.
Special shout out to Randy Tejan, who is the main attorney on the case, who has stepped up to help this family. And it's been.
Now the ACLU has had a bit of a problem here in Dakota County.
We have, yes.
And it's called DNA collection. And let's talk about that.
Yeah, so that's, it's kind of, just to give you a little bit of background. So almost, I would say about 10 years ago, the Minnesota legislature passed a law requiring collection of DNA from people who've been arrested but not yet convicted of certain felony charges. That law was held to be unconstitutional by the Minnesota Court of Appeals. The court said that it violated the U.S. and Minnesota constitutions because you're talking about arrestees, not people who've already been convicted. Fast forward a few years, and the U.S. Supreme Court has decided a case called Maryland versus King, in which the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the practice of taking DNA from arrestees. They claimed that it was no different from fingerprints that were just identifying people. And so after that decision, Dakota County, in spite of our Court of Appeals decision, decided that they were going to resume the collection of DNA from arrestees.
And people should understand that we also have a constitution here in this state. And in many instances, our constitution has more severe protections of individuals than the United States Constitution. And in those cases, our Constitution would prevail. But in Dakota County, they have gone ahead and they've taken these DNA samples of people who not yet have been convicted of a crime. So
That's exactly.
in comes the ACLU again to protect those individual rights.
Exactly. And so we've got two arguments. One, the Court of Appeals has already said it violates our Minnesota Constitution, and so you can't just ignore that when the law changes for the U.S. Constitution. But number two, even if the court was going to relook at it, we think that the court should find greater protection under our state constitution. There's a long history of the Minnesota Supreme Court recognizing stronger protections when it comes to search and seizure rights in Minnesota. And
Individual rights.
Individual
really,
rights,
right.
yes, exactly.
So that case is ongoing
Yep.
as we speak.
It is. We are in the discovery process, which can be kind of drawn out. But the one thing is that the county has agreed that they're not going to pursue a DNA sample from our client until after the case is resolved. So
Now, you've had quite a bit of success with your warrant forgiveness program. What was that, and what is that today?
Well, so that program arose because when we did a study of arrests in Minneapolis, we found really shocking racial disparities. People of color over 9 times more likely to be arrested in Minneapolis than white people. And we saw that communities of color are policed differently, especially with low-level arrests. One of our findings was that of the top 5 or 6 charges, I think like the 4th top charge was low-level warrant. And so we're talking about a really substantial level of arrests that are just based on a low-level warrant. So that's people who, missed their court date and they got a bench warrant. They weren't able to pay their fine or respond to a traffic ticket. They get a bench warrant. And so ordinarily, to take care of those kinds of warrants, you have to turn yourself in and be booked into jail, and then you might be sitting in jail for 2 or 3 days. So for people who can't take off that much time from work, or they have childcare issues, it's a really terrifying experience to walk around having this warrant hanging over your head, but not really having the ability to take care of it and resolve it. And so,
or knowing if you do take care of it, you're going to end up in jail. You
Right.
might lose your job. Your family might be without the only adult over how many children, et cetera.
Right. And so we began talking, and the warrant amnesty was really the brainchild of the NAACP's now president, Jason Sowell. He was the one who started talking about it, and we agreed that this was a really great thing to do. We were able to get some grant funding to help cover some of the logistics of doing it, and so we approached Hennepin County and the judiciary in Hennepin County to try and work with them and do a warrant amnesty program.
And the bottom line?
The bottom line, we had an event on May 10th where we were able to resolve, I think, I'm going to fudge on the numbers, almost 200 warrants. And so people were able to clear their names. The cases were resolved that day, and people are able to move forward. We got some really moving letters from people who had participated. One woman was just so happy. She had been so stressed and so worried that she might, she had a small child, and she's just constantly worried that she might get arrested. So it was a really good thing. So
they're afraid to come forward.
Yeah.
There's also a $78 program in Hennepin County, I believe. If you have a warrant, a low-level warrant, you can post $78.
I'm not really familiar. I know that the courts have been working to help more people resolve their warrants.
So that's the courts doing
Yeah.
without your participation.
Yeah,
I know that
yeah.
because when I was on my ride-along, we picked up someone who had a warrant, and a family member went down and paid the $78 in Hennepin County, and
okay.
she was
All right.
released.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
might be
I know-
something to look into also,
Yeah,
because that
yeah.
seemed to me to be a good program.
I know that they have been working on other aspects, because there's over 10,000 outstanding warrants in Hennepin County, which is unbelievable.
Civil asset forfeiture
Yes.
was something that has bothered me since it reared its ugly head about a decade ago, where you're in a car, you get arrested, it's not even your car, the car gets impounded, and it could be sold, and the owner is just out. Where are we with that?
Well, it's been a long haul. There have been a lot of reforms that have happened over the past few years. I want to also give credit to the Institute for Justice here in Minnesota. They've been working tirelessly on these reform issues. We've worked with them a lot in the legislature to get various measures passed. A couple things that the legislature has done over the past few years. One is that now for most forfeitures, there actually has to be a there has to be a criminal conviction before the agency can actually keep your property. And so, but there is still this administrative forfeiture process, which essentially, if they arrest you, they seize your property, and you don't file to challenge that seizure, it goes through the administrative process, and you don't have to have a conviction still. But at least for people who are challenging their forfeiture, you do have to have a conviction, and so that's a really good reform. The other key reform that passed this last session is an innocent owner reform. Now, prior to this new law, an innocent owner could challenge the forfeiture by saying, hey, wait a minute, I loaned my car to my friend. I had no idea that they were going to be doing this, and so you shouldn't take my car. But if you were an innocent co-owner, you were completely barred from saying, hey, wait a minute, no, my spouse used the vehicle. I had no idea that they were going to be driving drunk, and if I did, I would have stopped it. I'm completely innocent. You should not take property from me. And there was a court case called Lassay versus Chevy Tahoe where the Minnesota Supreme Court said, no, as an innocent co-owner, you can't raise this claim. Legislature fixed that this year. So as a
matter of fact, one of our later interviews today is Senator Jim Carlson, who I think is one of the legislators who was involved with the introduction of that bill.
Yeah. It was a bipartisan effort, and this has been, it's probably been a 3 or 4 year process to get even that modest reform passed. So there are still a lot of things that need to happen. We need to get rid of the profit motive. Right now, with forfeitures, the proceeds get split by the agency that seized the property. We want to see it go into the general fund. We want to see more financial reporting and auditing, et cetera.
Ignition Interlock is also something that you've been involved in.
Yes. So we, as the ACLU, we didn't really take a position on the Ignition Interlock program, which is a program that allows you to, if you've had a DWI, you can get your vehicle back if you agree to, this ignition interlock that requires a clean breath sample in order to start
blow into
the
your
vehicle.
steering wheel.
Blow into your steering wheel. Yeah, exactly. So we didn't really take a position on that. I think it's generally a good program. But what we learned is that about a year ago, that the Department of Public Safety was going to mandate that these ignition interlock systems be equipped with GPS, which would have allowed for real-time GPS tracking of participants' locations. And there's no legitimate reason that you need to do that and need to track somebody. There was also no notice to participants that their location was going to be tracked. And so, again, there was a bipartisan bill in the legislature this year that prohibited that kind of GPS tracking. There is a U.S. Supreme Court decision that says that GPS tracking of vehicles is a search under the Fourth Amendment. And so this, this warrantless tracking raises both Fourth Amendment and privacy concerns.
It's interesting because we're at a time now, as we end the term of Governor Dayton, where the Supreme Court probably, in addition to having more women than men, I believe at the present time, has moved a little bit to the left.
They have.
The United States Supreme Court, with this latest appointment, I fear has moved a little bit to the right. So I think some interesting cases are going to come down over the next few years.
Yeah, and it's not always, what's interesting is that, Scalia was very conservative and certainly not a friend on a lot of ACLU issues, but he was pretty decent on the Fourth Amendment.
Yes, he was.
And he was, it's hard to tell how the new court is going to play out. We often find strange bedfellows with the ACLU.
Well, you've had right to die cases that you've been involved in, although the one that's pending here was not one that you're involved in. Transgender, certainly in schools and in restrooms and in locker rooms and things like that.
Yes.
Separation of church and state is something that you're involved in. Voting rights, or these spurious allegations of voter fraud.
Voter fraud, right.
And I just saw a report that was released within the last few days that said out of 1 billion votes, there were 31 cases of voter fraud substantiated, which is such a minuscule amount that it defies statistics.
It really is not an issue. Voter fraud is a I would say a shibboleth for voter suppression, that really the aim is to suppress the vote. And we see that with this Election Integrity Commission, really seeking intrusive information about voters. We saw this in the legislature this last session with a bill that would have required all kinds of details about voters to be public. Voters who had a challenged status, for example, that challenge could simply be because their name was confused with somebody else who had a criminal conviction, or.
And we're fortunate in this state that we have a very progressive state under our Secretary of State, Steve Simon, who recognizes that freedom says, let's get as many people registered in voting as possible. Let's not try to cut out one group or another group or an ethnic population for really spurious reasons.
Yeah, Secretary Simon has been great, and we applauded him when he said, wait a minute, no, I'm not going to provide all of this private information to this committee because, your goal isn't integrity, it is voter suppression, unfortunately.
And he's going to be with us again in a couple of months.
Oh, great.
So, any other cases in particular that you want to talk about, or immigration sanctuary cities, perhaps?
Sanctuary cities, this is, that reminds me about a really great new program that the ACLU has. After the election, as an organization, we had kind of structured ourselves to not rely on volunteers because we did not have very many volunteers. And now, after the election, there was a tremendous amount of groundswelling of support for the ACLU and the work we're doing, and people who wanted to get involved. And so, at a national level, the ACLU created a program called People Power. And so the idea is that this will be volunteer-driven activism. The People Power folks are getting, help and coordination from the ACLU. They're not speaking necessarily as ACLU spokespeople. They're people power folks. But they have been working all over the state of Minnesota to implement what we're calling Freedom Cities policies. So basically policies to keep police out of the business of enforcing immigration law and keeping immigration for the federal government and protecting immigrants
And
from
we had an incident
policies.
right here on one of the light rail trains where a conductor or whoever it was asked a person if he was a citizen or not. That individual ended up getting arrested and held by immigration. And I just saw in today's paper that something has worked out to release him on bail at least.
Yeah, he's at least received a bond hearing and should be able to be released on bail while his proceedings are going. But this raises an important point, which is that this was a local police officer, Metro Transit officer, asking these questions. And when we think about our local police, we think about the critical nature of the police relationship with the community. If you don't have the trust of your community, you cannot do your job. Police cannot do their job without the trust of the community. And if you are, if undocumented immigrants have total fear of the police, that the police are going to be no different than immigration, then you've lost that segment of the community. You've lost that trust, and that makes us all less safe because then people aren't coming forward to report crimes, they're not cooperating with the police, and
where community policing has been implemented, it has been very successful, integrating the police with the people of the community so that they do build up that trust and so that they know that they will get a fair shake and they know that there won't be a knock on their door and perhaps being deported or whatever.
Right. And there's, unfortunately, an incident like this undoes all of that relationship building, and you have to start from square one. But there are some encouraging programs that we're seeing in Minnesota. The Minneapolis Police Department is going through, it's called the National Initiative on Police and Community Trust, building trust, and they're training officers in how to exhibit procedural justice, which is a really great thing. They're doing training on de-escalation. They're doing training on just, a lot of things to build the relationship.
Unfortunately, we usually go through some very painful incidents before we recognize the need to improve, the need to address these problems. And that's apparently what we're doing now.
It is.
And apparently also we're coming to the end of this interview.
Wow, that was very quick.
And as usual, there are many things that we didn't get to, but I trust that you'll be back again soon.
Happy to do so.
And bring in the new director,
I will.
executive director, when she is appointed.
I will do that.
And send our very best to Chuck Samuelson.
I will do
and
that
tell
as
him
well.
to keep in touch. We've been
right.
talking with TERESA Nelson, who is the legal brain of the Minnesota ACLU. And thanks so much.
Thank you. That went really quick.
That's what everybody